This episode of the Psych Sessions podcast is sponsored by Pearson Revel, which I think is a game changer for students and teachers. I started using Revel a few years ago, and I can't imagine going back to what I was doing before. Revel helps me feel more responsible as an educator, knowing that my students are receiving evidence-based learning experiences, like retrieval practice. The single best thing about it for me is that it gets students to read. Do you know how long it's been since I've said to a colleague, my students just won't read the book? Yeah, Revel helped me solve that problem. And with that out of the way, I have all kinds of freedom to design the course I want. Now, I assign readings from the text with a click of a button that is delivered to my students as a tracked assignment according to whatever date I schedule. Revel is fully digital and highly engaging. It also has a mobile app that allows students to read, listen, or practice on any device. And students truly like it. So do yourself a favor, check out Revel. Psych Sessions listeners can try Revel out for one term at no cost to your students. For more information, please email revel@pearson.com or visit go.pearson.com/psych sessions. Hello and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld along with Eric Landrum, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the and stuff. This is episode 103, where Eric had the opportunity to interview Roxanne Sullivan from Bellevue University in Bellevue, Nebraska. But before we get to that, Psych Sessions is supported by STP, the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. And as always, Eric and I want to invite you, urge you, compel you to become a member of STP. I don't know why you're not a member. If you're not a member, it's $25 a year. It's a wonderful organization. The resources, the awards and grants are well worth it. And even if you didn't get anything out of it, it is such a great organization to give your $25 a year to. So please go ahead and do that. Also from STP this week, STP is pleased to announce that several new resources are available in the recent content section at teachpsych.org. A resource on teaching counseling skills, an ebook on administering student-friendly psychology conferences, and the 4th edition of the ebook Teaching Tips. All of these resources are freely available to read and download. Please become a member of STP. And if you haven't heard, this has been a big year for Psych Sessions. We are growing. Please check out our other programming, Ask Psych Sessions and Sodal Psych Sessions. And as always, we are cooking up some fun stuff in the background, so watch for some announcements soon about new Psych Sessions programming. Now, before you hear the interview with Roxanne Sullivan, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments of this conversation. Let's just go for it because I think this is one of those conversations that gets to a topic that immediately perks people's ears up. And Roxanne Sullivan is in her 38th year of teaching, and she has seen a lot in her time, and she reflects on gender discrimination throughout her career, starting in graduate school. And she tells some stories that would make you shiver, and stories that many women probably know all too well in our field. And as they talk about, hopefully our field is changing some in that way and has changed in that way. And I think you're going to find that to be a really fascinating conversation. I'm so glad that she said what she said and that she has a lot of perspective over the years and something to teach us. I would have loved to hear Roxanne talk a little bit more about how applied developmental science has really taken over some of the human development field. And they mentioned that in this episode. And then didn't go further into that conversation. And so I was hoping that she would have told us a little bit more. I sure would hope to run into Roxanne at a conference someday and have her share a little bit, as that's not my area. But I wonder how something like that happens, and then what it means to those folks who do have degrees in developmental psychology. As they went over her story chronologically, I found it really interesting to listen to someone who was an overachiever from 17 years old. Obviously, a lot of factors involved in that, but someone whose parents told her that you are going to get a master's degree, and told her that very early. And mistakenly, I thought to myself, well, these are educated parents who want their child, who really value education, want their child to follow suit. Not the case. So you'll want to listen for that, because it really threw me a curveball when I was listening to why it was that she wanted to get a master's degree, and why her parents wanted her to get at least a master's degree. And of course, Roxanne being Roxanne, she goes above and beyond that. Some of what you're going to hear in Roxanne's story and just who she is, and I don't know Roxanne, but one of the things you're going to hear is that she is, as she calls it, a woman of substance. I love this part where her students sometimes get Roxanne, and then sometimes they get Dr. Sullivan. And, I wouldn't want to mess with her. Let's just say that. But, it goes back to, I think, her mother. We talk about in this episode how her mother was the first woman who was on one of her school boards, and really helped make a way for her to achieve some of the things that she achieved in her career. If I could, I'd also like to pick Roxanne's brain a little bit more about what it was like when she transferred it to a 4-year institution to come in as a community college graduate transfer student. She said that the experience wasn't great, that she was looked down upon, that coming from a community college was thought of kind of being lower than a freshman. And as I'm locked into this community college world, this 2-year world, I wonder how that has changed, and if it has changed over time. I hope it has. And Roxanne, again, we're going to have a coffee next time we're at a conference together, and that will be my second question for you. Roxanne talks about how much of her institution is taught online. They offer many, many degrees online. And so she reflects on how the pandemic has affected her, maybe less so than other people. And she has been at this for a long, long time. So, but in the pre-recording, which you won't get to hear, Eric and Roxanne are talking about her nervousness as she is coming into the fall semester, as this was recorded in summer. So even the best teachers and the most capable teachers do have those jitters, especially during a pandemic, obviously. I'm not sure where Eric and Roxanne first met, but I do know that they have an RMPA connection, that Roxanne is a former president, as is Eric, and they, I'm sure, saw each other at RMPA for many, many years, and that's where this relationship has come out of. They do discuss conferences going online during the pandemic, and Roxanne gets to share a little bit about attending APA for the first time because of how accessible it was due to cost, this year being a remote experience. And they talk about whether you can have an effective conference online. And that was an interesting conversation, especially for somebody who runs a conference. So if you do run any kind of conference during this pandemic, please listen up, because you might be interested. They also mentioned digitizing keynote speakers, and this is something that the Psych Sessions podcast has done. At the beginning of the year, we did a podference. This is pre-pandemic, where we had recorded some keynote talks throughout the year and then released them all at once as a sort of online conference. And they talk about the value in that, and it made me think, I need to make some calls here, because I think that Psych Sessions could serve teachers of psychology in that way during this time a little more intentionally. And so soon after I get off this microphone, I think I'm going to send a message to Lindsay Maslin and Jordan Troycy. And that was my alarm. So that means I've got to be somewhere, and I'm done. Anyway, enjoy this episode with Dr. Roxanne Sullivan and Eric Landrum.
I'm so pleased to have my guest, Dr. Roxanne Sullivan from Bellevue University is it Bellevue, Nebraska?
Yes, it is.
That's the city.
I've
been there, but I didn't know if the city was the same name of the university.
Yes, it is, because it was established by the Chamber of Commerce of Bellevue, Nebraska.
Well, hi, Roxanne. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate this. I've been gently pestering you for months now, very gently and hopefully politely, that you would chat with me on the podcast. So I'm very happy this is happening.
Me too. I'm looking forward to this.
All right. So just before we hit start, so to speak, we were doing our pre-game warm-ups, and we wandered onto the topic of the APA convention for 2020. And I said, wait, hang on to that. I want to talk to you about that. And so we're chatting in August of 2020, and you attended and I did not.
You did?
No, you didn't see me in the hallways? No, I wasn't there.
Although I thought Judith Sugar.
Well, Judith, good for her. University of Nevada, Reno faculty member, former RMPA president, as are you and as I once was. So tell us about APA 2020, since you were the one who attended.
It was the first time I ever attended the national conference, so I was a newbie. Part of the reason why I did it was, I have to admit, the price was right. And the fact that I can go back and look at posters and sessions for an entire year was also a great incentive. A lot of the sessions I went to that were spoken oral sessions were pre-recorded. A few did have live question answers, and I found the topics to be quite intriguing. There was a lot on the COVID-19 pandemic from a psychological point of view. And in fact, I'm going to use some of that information in my classes this fall. The posters were interesting. Part of the reason I also went to the APA conference is the Nebraska Psych Society and the Psychological and Educational Researchers of Kansas have a joint meeting in November, and we're going to do it virtually. So I wanted to see how a virtual conference could be held. And I particularly liked how they were doing the posters. So I think what we may do is end up doing a virtual poster conference and maybe record one or two speakers that we can share and give people time to comment on the posters. So I found it interesting. I found President Schulman's comments very good. And so, yeah, it was a different experience. My feet didn't hurt. That was the important part, because I didn't have to walk around in heels.
So it's your first APA, but I've known you long enough and I know you well enough that you've been to many, many conferences over the years, as we've shared many Rocky Mountain Psychological Association conventions. So some of the either just regular talks or, let's say, keynotes were pre-recorded and some were live, correct?
Correct.
And so, and I'm not going to ask you to name names or name speakers, but honestly, Roxanne, were any of those, either the pre-recorded or the live, were any of them of equal quality, of equal experience that you would have gotten face to face, do you think?
I think the presentation I heard by Jonathan Haidt was equivalent to. to what you probably would have heard in person. I think the biggest frustration with his presentation was asking him questions because he wasn't able to be there live for a question and answer period afterwards. And I think that was the biggest frustration was they would have a chat room going and that got distracting. People were asking questions and not realizing that it was recorded.
Interesting.
And then they also did something that probably is only with virtual conferences, not totally, but probably. Asking questions like, how can I get CE credits in that? And APA was really good about sending a booklet about the conference, how you could get all this information prior to you logging in to things. And that got really frustrating along the way. But other than that, I think they were more poised at times and weren't as nervous as some people can get when they're giving an in-person presentation. I know I'm going back and listening to Jonathan Haidt's presentation, but also a couple of the COVID-19 presentations. Believe it or not, I wasn't overly familiar with a lot of the presenters, partly because they tended to be more clinical. I'm a developmentalist, but I found them very interesting. And I was very happy with the diversity. There was also a lot of presentations and sessions on dealing with the current racial issues going on in the country and how we can address them as psychologists. So that was a good thing.
Right. But you would have gotten all of that variety of programming if APA would have been held face to face.
I would have, but I wouldn't have been able to go back and revisit it.
Well, but so I think that's a very good point. And actually, I'm actually headed in a direction with this, which are two things. First off, I think you make a very good point that you wouldn't have been able to go back and revisit it, but that's something that conventions could do. Conventions can record their live face-to-face recordings. In fact, Garth and I for psych sessions have, with permission, started to record keynote addresses and made them available through psych sessions. But the other thing that I'm a little bit concerned about, as a trend is that, will conventions, once we can be back together face to face, go, hey, let's just keep going virtual because, it's so much cheaper. We don't have to have hotels. The carbon footprint is less. But I don't know, maybe I'm just an old fogey, but, I think there's something lost from us not being face to face and, not having that live opportunity to see facial expressions and body language but to hear a person in the room and see what's going on and ask questions live and not notice that, oops, this is pre-recorded and I can't really ask questions in chat and get them answered. I don't know. I just, again, I think I'm just being an old fogey.
I would hope it wouldn't go that way, frankly. I know somebody asked Sandy Schulman in one of her presidential exchanges. There were live exchanges that would go on, and which are recorded now, but they were live, about going the next convention. We have some of this virtual things going on, but also not wanting to totally get rid of I like the face to face. I like being able to interact with people. And I think you get a different kind of perspective. It's nice to have the information. And given now, I haven't been able to go to APA before. And in fact, there was a huge number of international psychologists from all over the world who were attending, who probably would not have been able to attend and share their information if it was in a physical setting. So I agree with you that I hope we don't go down that road that, let's do everything virtual, because it's kind of even like with online learning. you lose something of that human connection that I think we all need. And plus, it's a way of getting away um, from your everyday life is to go to a conference and see people you haven't seen for a while, sit down and have an informal chat with. That really wasn't able to be done with virtual conference.
Yeah, and actually, Roxanne, just listening to you talk about that, I think there's a way to have best of the both worlds, and it might be a little bit more expensive, but I also appreciate your point about you've got these materials to go back to, and you're planning on actually reviewing them. I wonder if the best of both worlds is to have face-to-face conferences, but then also video record and audio record them. And so, the people who can't attend face to face could do the digital version, the people who can go face to face, because I love what you just said about there was a huge international presence of people who made that may have been also their first APA because it was more affordable. I love that happened. And so, why not do both and serve as many people as possible?
Yeah, I think all of I've never seen a rationale for why when you have keynote speakers, and we've done, with RMPA, we've had some fantastic keynote speakers, to get permission to record those and then archive them so that they're available for other people who weren't able to go there. Or you're at the conference and you've got 2 or 3 things going at the same time and ending up missing something. So you could have heard my presidential talk last year, even though you weren't at RMPA, if we would have recorded it and archived it.
That's true. I did have a Psychi event at
I had to get that
convention.
in there.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And plus, again, you just made a good point. And we're going to stop talking about APA here in a minute. But, at APA, there are sometimes up to 16 concurrent sessions going. And so, again, recording, digitizing these things makes great sense, even for people who are there face-to-face, because they wouldn't miss out on the 15 other events they couldn't possibly attend at the same time. So Roxanne, let me shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Tell me, how long have you been at Bellevue?
I will be starting my 38th year.
Oh my goodness, 38 years. So I'm assuming that Bellevue was your first job out of graduate school?
Yes, it was. I was a lonely little 27-year-old.
And did you go there as an assistant professor?
Yes.
Wow. And I heard you say earlier you're a developmentalist. That's correct?
Yeah.
38 years. And so what has kept you there? What has Bellevue done to earn that level of loyalty? Because that's rare.
I love my students. The students who attend Bellevue are not your typical college students. We have typical college students, but for example, my first year at Bellevue, and I was just this little 27-year-old, the average age of students at Bellevue at that time was 35. And so I was much younger than the average age of a lot of my students in my classes. And the learning experience I was getting from those students, as well as the learning experience I hopefully provided for those students, just keeps going and going. There is something special about being in a classroom where you have such an age diversity. So this past year, my youngest student, for example, in experimental psych, was 20. My oldest student was 68. And the dynamic among those students in terms of supporting and learning from each other is just what keeps me going here. I would go to, someplace other, like I know you talked with Mark Ware, and I'll go over to Creighton, and our students don't look anything like Creighton students or University Nebraska-Lincoln students. They're truly unique. And even the ones who are traditional age students, the 18 to 24-year-olds, they have a different mindset than at a Research One school or even a elective private school. So it's basically been my students a freedom to teach how I want to teach in general, and a lot of support on trying to be the best educator that I can be. So those are things. There's a lot of nuttiness about my place, but those students who have kept me here, and I've interviewed at other places, and one of the things that was told to me is they said, "I don't think you're ready to move because you seem to like it too much." And I never thought of it that way before. Now, if you would have asked me when I interviewed for the job at Bellevue how long I was going to be here, I said 1 year. And the president who interviewed me said, "Of course, that's how long your contract." Um, but to be starting my 38th year, in fact, yesterday was the 37th anniversary of me moving to Omaha. Um, Nobody does that anymore, although you're
Right.
close.
I've been in Boise State. I'll be starting my 29th year.
Oh, you're catching up.
Here pretty soon. So Roxanne, I have a number that prompts me with a number of questions.
Okay.
So Bellevue must be a non-residential campus.
Actually, in the last 2 years, we actually now do have student housing. And it's only been in the last 2 years that we've built some student housing apartments. And we also rent parts of apartment buildings close to campus for our international students. We have a fairly large Chinese population who attends Bellevue. And a lot of our athletes do live on campus. But up until about 2 years ago, this is the third year we've had the we don't call them dorms, it's student housing. We were totally commuter.
Totally commuter. And so what's the origin story of that campus then? It just was it a normal school? Was it where does it come from?
Well, way back at the turn of the 20th century, there was a Bellevue College that kind of went downhill. And then in the mid 1960s, we have Offutt Air Force Base, which is approximately a mile from the campus. And they were looking for educational opportunities for the military staff who were at Offutt. The Chamber of Commerce of Bellevue, Nebraska was approached about trying to develop a university or a college at the time. And so Bellevue was born out of a combination of need from Offutt Air Force Base and the local adult learners in the Bellevue area, but the broader Omaha metropolitan area. And so those first board of directors, we were in one building, which was a former, how do I put it? It was a lumberyard office building. Our campus was actually built on an old lumberyard. And there was one building and everything was in that building, the library, etc. And we graduated our first class in 1967. And it's just grown from there. So when, excuse me, when I came to Bellevue in 1983, we had 2,300 students. Now in 2020, we have fewer on campus, residential students. We have under 1,000 on campus, but we have probably 13,000 online students across the world.
13,000 online students.
Yes.
And wow. Okay. So now you've just triggered a whole nother series of questions. 1983, you arrive at Bellevue.
Yeah. Tuition was $43.50 a credit hour.
What's the average age now? Do you have any ballpark?
The average age is probably around 26.
Okay.
It's come down.
Yeah. So you've got less than 1,000 on campus, but you've got 13,000 off campus.
Right now, it's expected to go up by another 6,000.
Do your on campus students take online classes?
Some of them do, yes. And every single class we have, whether on campus, has 25% of the class online. So everybody has an online component. But there's a good mix of students who take both online and residential classes.
But 13,000 of them are taking just exclusively online.
Yes.
And they might be living anywhere in the world, not necessarily in Bellevue.
The vast majority are living in other places than Nebraska. This summer I had students who were stationed in Germany. I had one over in the Middle East. I've had students in Korea. We've had students who are on submarines. I haven't been lucky to have a submariner who's active duty. I have had submariners in my classes before. Yeah, they're all over the world. A lot of military, and we also have significant corporate partnerships.
So Bellevue, when the COVID-19 pivot came along, Bellevue faculty said, "Pivot? What pivot?"
Almost exactly, yeah.
You all know how to teach online. Mm-hmm. There was no big, massive panic for, oh my gosh, how do we teach this class online? Because I'm guessing all of your faculty know how to teach online.
For the most part, yes. I did have a big panic because my psychology stat class is not offered online, and it was residential, and I had to move it online. But we did it, and I think we did it fairly well with the students. And so there were some bumps, but when I looked at my colleagues across the country who were thrown into this online thing, I almost had a feeling of like survivor's guilt, that it wasn't that big a deal for me because everything but my stat class had been offered online. So I had an online version that I could use as a backup.
And I'm assuming that every degree at Bellevue can be earned online.
The only degrees right now that cannot be earned online would be the natural sciences degrees. There are natural sciences courses, including chemistry and anatomy and physiology, but you cannot get like an environmental science degree online. You can get a sustainability studies degree online, but more traditional nat sci like chemistry you can't get online.
Okay. So let me ask you about your origin story. And this is a question I ask almost every podcast interview. When you were growing up, when you were in, let's say, high school,
Mm-hmm.
what was you know what's coming, don't you?
Wait, yeah.
And when I asked Mark Ware this recently, he said, "Oh, good. I'm so glad you asked me this, Eric."
Yes.
The question is this: was the question in your home, will you go to college, or was the question, what college will you go to?
It was, what college will I go to? From the time I was 7, I was told I would have a master's degree.
Wow. By mom, dad, or both?
Both. Neither one of my parents have a college degree. My dad went to college for a couple of years. My mom took a college course. She was a food manager at Kmart, and she needed to take a course in food sanitation to be certified to be a food manager in the state of Illinois. So she had a college course. But from the time I was little, I was told girls had to have an education. You're going to go to college. You're going to have a master's degree. I don't care in what, but you're going to college. My parents raised me weird. I'm very happy they did that because they knew girls needed their education. And in fact, I started college 2 weeks after my 17th birthday. I went to a community college to get my senior year of high school because there was nothing for me to take at my small high school left that was truly academic.
Okay. So I'm sorry to interrupt. So let's slow down a bit.
Okay.
So you grew up in Illinois?
I grew up in north central Illinois.
Where in Illinois?
It's a little town called Depew. Um,
Okay.
it's about 60 miles north of Peoria, about 120 miles southwest of Chicago, right along Interstate 80. It was an industrial town in the middle of the cornfields. Grew up on a lake. Had power boat races all my life. I was even Little Miss powerboat race when I was 5. And it was a town that was, when I was growing up, about 40% of the people who lived in my little town were of Mexican heritage. They were second and third generation. And so I grew up in a very interesting kind of thing where I wasn't looking at ethnicity or anything. In fact, didn't realize, I guess I was supposed to be prejudiced until I went to college and people couldn't believe I had friends who had Hispanic names. So it's a small little town. Right now, it's one of the major Superfund sites in the country because of a zinc plant that was there. And we had excellent education. My graduation.
So much so that you could skip some grades.
Well, my mother was on the school board. She was the first woman to ever serve on the school board from the time I was in second grade till I was a junior in high school. And the only thing she ever did to do something for me where, she put her word in was to encourage me to skip my senior year because I was always told I had to take 5 solid subjects a year. So by the time I was at the end of my junior year, I had enough credits to graduate except for American government. And so I went to the community college, took American government at the college level. And that was probably the best thing. One of the best things my parents ever did for me was to encourage me to go to college early because I loved it. I thrived.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. We can always edit this out.
All right.
Because I don't want to embarrass you. Do you have a high school diploma?
Yes, I do have a high school diploma. And in fact, I had some friends from the college come to my high school graduation that I was not invited to, so I didn't participate. And my psychology professor came from the community college, and I was actually a college sophomore by the time I got my high school diploma.
Oh, so you went to your high school graduation at 18 when you would have been a senior, but you were already 2 years into college.
No, I was 17.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You didn't graduate like the rest of us 18-year-olds. Pardon me.
I was 17, and just like in high school, I took 18 credit hours at the community college. So I had 36 credit hours by the time I was done with my freshman year.
Yeah.
I'm a school nerd.
Yeah. So is that where the overachieving started, Roxanne?
No, I think it started earlier than that. I'm a firstborn.
Like second grade coloring book kind of thing. And
yeah.
They said only color one coloring book a day and you did 2, something like that?
Yeah, sort of like that. Yeah. It's funny because that little town, which my parents wanted me to get out of, because they thought it would hold me back. When I look back on my graduating class and the class ahead of me, because we got along with each other, we have at least 4 PhDs, a couple of MDs, probably 10 master's degrees, and there's probably a big smattering of bachelors out of approximately 50 people.
Yeah, that town didn't hold you back. That town sounds like a launching pad for success.
It was. You didn't think of it that way. And if I hadn't gone into psychology, it probably would have held me back a little bit more because my original major was not psychology.
Okay, so all right, so let's go down that path. So let's say you graduate at high school from like age 14, something like that.
Something like
and then you did some community college classes to fill the gap. And then where do you go to college?
Okay, well, I actually did get my associate's degree at that community college.
Of course you did at age 15 and a half. Yeah.
My bachelor's is from the University of Iowa.
The University of Iowa. And what was your first major?
Actually, at Iowa, it was psychology. My first major when I was in the community college was music.
Was music. All right. Now let's just pause right there. So it was music. So was it music education or performance?
Both.
Of course. What a silly question. I'm sorry. I asked or. I didn't even get to the and.
Well, part of the reason why I left music is that I get very nervous doing solo work vocally. And I had a jerk for a band director at the community college, and I had a nut for a psychology professor. And I was interested in psychology, but I was probably considering myself going into music from the time I was about 9, because one of the other things my parents required us to do was to learn to play an instrument.
And okay, you can't. I just can't let you stop there. I'm sorry, I interrupted. What instrument was it?
Clarinet.
Clarinet. And you said us. I'm sorry. Are there siblings?
I had a brother who was 2 years younger than me.
Okay, but it sounds like that he has passed away.
Yeah, I'm the only one left right now.
Okay, all right. I'm very sorry.
Oh yeah, it's my brother's got the more interesting thing, but we had to play an instrument. We were in choir. I performed throughout undergrad except for my junior year, so I did perform in the band at Iowa. I did vocal work, ensemble work at the community college. I still consider myself, when I left psych and went from music and went into psychology, a young man I was seeing at the time who was an art major got very upset with me that I was abandoning music, because he always said he could see me at the Metropolitan Opera. And I thought, no, I sound like I'm sitting on a vibrating pillow. My vibrato is so bad when I sing solo. But actually, my undergrad thesis was partly based on music and memory. So I continue it on.
So you do Iowa, and I almost feel silly asking this question. Do you do your bachelor's in psychology at Iowa in 4 years?
Well, I had 2 years at community college, and then I did 2 years at Iowa.
So you did a bachelor's degree in 2 years at
Iowa. It was a total of 4 years. I transferred I transferred to associate's degree, which was a battle, because at that point in time, community colleges were not very well respected, and it was like you were lowlier than a freshman and having to prove yourself. And luckily, I had some professors at Iowa who were just terrific, and I got involved with the honors program there and conducted my first research at Iowa when nobody back in the 1970s, undergrads, weren't conducting research. And that kind of is part of why I've always been so involved with undergraduate research too, is because I understand the importance of it.
And I think I know now how to frame this question. How many majors did you have and how many minors did you have as an undergraduate?
I only had psych once I got out of music. Um, stuck with psych. I knew I was at a very historic department. Um, and once I got into psych, because I was always interested in the research. In fact, I was so upset because you'd read the course description, it would be research this, and I thought I was going to be conducting research in all these different areas. And I didn't. But I mean, I had some people at Iowa who historically, I mean, they worked with Kenneth Spence. Um, they were the bedrock of an area of psychology that doesn't exist anymore, which is experimental child psychology. Um, they were some of the founders of that subdiscipline that got subsumed by developmental psych, which developmental psych now is not existing. My program at Michigan State is no longer in existence. It gets subsumed by applied developmental science. So I've been lucky in my education to really have had some of the movers and shakers um, of kind of the history of psych.
So that's where you clearly headed after Iowa. Michigan State?
No, Purdue.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Bad
okay.
guess.
I left psychology. I went to Purdue in child development family studies, which at that time was in the School of Consumer and Family Sciences, which used to be known as home economics.
Yes.
And I went to Purdue for two reasons, maybe three. One was my love of working with children, and that was a big thing. Two was one of my mentors at Iowa had done his PhD in that same program. And three, I was lucky enough to get a half-time research assistantship as a first-year grad student. And it was a master's program. It was a terminal master's program. You assumed you were going to get in the PhD program, but it was a terminal master's. And Purdue was not one of my favorite places, but I did get a good education because I took stats from B.J. Weiner. And in fact, I was one of the last groups that B.J. Weiner ever taught. And I had heard horror stories about this man when I was an undergraduate and hadn't even thought about Purdue. I had a friend who was going to Purdue and was telling these horror stories about the statistics professor who just made life and living hell, and everybody was scared of him. And I had never thought I was going to go to Purdue. And then when I did, and the very first class I took, and this was at 7:30 in the morning, I walked into this huge auditorium, sat down, made a friend, and this man came in and held up his textbook and said, "You're not going to understand anything in this book." And we went from there, and we covered literally my entire undergraduate stat course in the first session. And it was
That's impressive.
It must be him. I loved the man. He was hated at Purdue by a lot of folks. But I can read his textbook now. And go on.
And Roxanne, I don't want to spend too much time on this, and I'm going to kind of let it pass.
Sure.
But you said that you were lucky to get a graduate assistantship.
Yeah, research assistantship.
Yeah, research assistantship. You weren't lucky. I don't know if you listen to the podcast or not, and it really doesn't matter. But luck had nothing to do with it.
Well, it was partly based that I had done a thesis, and I got a lot of good experience. It was just unusual.
You worked really hard and you applied for it, and it was competitive. And
I didn't apply for it. I was originally given a quarter-time teaching assistantship, And then the person who became my advisor got a grant from the Ag Extension Station and then asked me if I would want to do that before he even met me.
Yeah, but still, you had credentials. You
Yeah.
got into the program. You did some things. It wasn't a dart on a dartboard.
Well, I have that imposter syndrome thing going on. So,
as do so many academics, and as do so many Nebraskans, by the way.
Oh yeah,
I don't know what's going on there.
I don't know either.
Anyway, I don't want to get off the rails too bad.
Okay. So yeah, I went to Purdue. I did my master's in 2 years. My advisor.
That must have felt weird being a mere mortal and doing a master's in 2 years.
Well, yeah.
That's like the rest of us.
Well, I was normal, but I was only 20 when I started, and I was the youngest person. And I couldn't wait to be in my 30s because all of my friends were in their 30s. And it's like, I'm tired of being the youngest. Finally, I'm no longer the youngest of anything.
Finally.
But yeah, no. After Purdue, then I went to Michigan State and did not finish my PhD in 2 years, so you don't have to worry about that one.
A year and a half.
No, let's put it this way. I could have done it in 2 years, but they wanted me to retake some classes that I already had at Purdue. But yeah, no, I went to Michigan State. I was on an NIMH predoctoral fellowship for 2 years. Then went to a quarter-time teaching assistantship because my dissertation advisor pulled some, we're going to give this to one of my other friends because he's married and he's going to have a kid. And you don't really need this money. So I was a teaching assistant for Intro to Psych, huge sections. I had one section that was 500 and one section that was 450 that I was a true teaching assistant for. And then those were 3 years at Michigan State. And then I had no funding, so I went back and lived in Illinois for a year till I got the job at Bellevue and finished my dissertation.
That is a whirlwind tour.
You didn't know all that stuff about me, did you?
I didn't. And you know what? Honestly, that's the beauty of the podcast.
Yeah.
Is that, even when you go to a conference and you hang out afterwards, you go to dinner, you sit at the bar, or you just sit in the hotel lobby, and you have conversations about important stuff. We never talk about our backgrounds or graduate school, very rarely. And this is the beauty of being able to have these types of conversations,
Yeah, it's been an interesting road along the way. I dealt with a lot of people trying to discourage me, and I didn't let them do that. I would have stayed at Purdue except for my advisor because he didn't want to sign the papers to let me start my PhD work in the summer. He wanted me to wait till the fall. And so I looked for someplace else, and Michigan State took me. And I could have worked with Alan Fogel, who was at Purdue at the time. He ended up retiring from University of Utah. And he is a world-known expert in infancy work. But I wanted to get my PhD someday because he did microanalytic analysis of videotapes of parents and infants, and I never would have gotten done. And then at Michigan State, I had a very jealous co-advisor who to this day probably doesn't think I should have a PhD, but that's okay.
But so Roxanne, when you say that a lot of people weren't supportive, do you think that's mostly a gender discrimination issue?
There was a gender discrimination issue.
Sure.
My advisor at Purdue who will remain nameless. Um, he tried something with me, didn't get anywhere, and he knew that automatically. But I saw things happen, including going to my very first professional conference, being in the back seat with him and another grad student, and we won't say what they were doing. But I was a naive 21-year-old, going, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is going to happen. It wasn't so much sexual kinds of things at Michigan State. They have some of the most, at the time, ethical people working at MSU. It was more that my area of research was not exactly a direct fit with my advisors. And I was one of my co-advisors' first academic daughters. So he didn't know what to do with me anyway. But now he's happy. But a lot of it was I found teaching at Michigan State. I taught my first course, my first year. I was given a heads up in September that I would be teaching in January. Didn't get told I was teaching in January until almost the end of November. And I taught my first class and I loved it. And my research supposedly went downhill. I got one of those infamous phone calls the second year at MSU saying, you're not doing as much research as you used to do. What's going on? And in fact, my program required you to teach 2 independent classes to finish the degree. They waived that because I liked teaching so much. They would never let me teach again an independent class. So I glommed on to Bellevue, where that's my life, is teaching. I wasn't probably your typical graduate student. I didn't know how to play politics very well.
Well, but you were able to play obviously well enough to earn your degree.
Oh, yeah. No, I did that. But they didn't make it as easy on me as some of the other people. So it's interesting. In fact, what's funny is the person who gave me the phone call where I thought I was going to get kicked out of the program, not for academics or anything, he became one of my biggest supporters. Even today, I still get Christmas cards from him. And he scared the you-know-what out of me when I had him for a class. But he did his undergraduate at a small college in Pennsylvania. And I can still remember some of my colleagues who were grad students with me telling me that coming to a school like Bellevue, I was committing academic suicide because you weren't going to get anywhere teaching. And I can still remember Hy Fitzgerald saying to me, he goes, you're doing the important work. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. You're doing the right thing. And that meant everything to me.
Well, and I think so many academics, they get their self-worth from what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them get their self-worth from the research that they do.
Yeah.
Or the amount of grant dollars they pull. And so when they see someone like you or someone like me who doesn't self-value based on the number of grant dollars they pull, they think of us as lesser beings.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I had someone like Hy Fitzgerald to say to me, no. Not everybody does the same thing. He just retired from Michigan State, and he started Michigan State in the 60s. And just an amazing person. And the other thing is, it's not that I gave up research. I was just doing other things. One of the things about Bellevue is we are not allowed to accept any federal funds other than financial aid. So trying to get like an NSF grant or an IMH grant, we can't do it. So
What's the reason for that?
We're one of 3 schools in the country like that. It was part of the charter that the board of directors did not want to feel as if we would be under the control of the federal government.
But you're taking federal financial student aid money.
I know they view that as different. I don't know if you've ever heard of Hillsdale College in Michigan.
No, I haven't.
It's a very conservative. In fact, our former president was there. Another one of my colleagues had taught there, but he wasn't like them. And that was kind of our model in the 80s because we almost went under in 1986. And so they just don't take it other than financial aid. Now, if you got a grant and you put me on your grant, I could take that money.
Okay.
I just can't accept the money.
So it's a self-imposed institutional rule.
Yes.
It's not some sort of state
Yeah.
or
No.
or government.
Mm-mm.
So Roxanne, I want to circle back to something, and it's fairly serious topic, and it's
Okay.
fairly personal. And if you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to. But we kind of touched on discrimination earlier. I'm not going to ask you to answer for all of for all females throughout humanity, but clearly you experienced gender discrimination through graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to ask you to, again, I don't want to ask you to answer for all women today, but do you feel like for you, has it gotten better over time? That is less discrimination, or is discrimination different for you? Or I guess what you see today, is it different, better, less? Is society just doing it differently and we're getting more creative discriminating against women, which I hope is not the case?
I think it has gotten better.
Well, that's good.
Sometimes it's different. Sometimes I see the opposite happening, where guys are actually discriminated against in certain areas. For example, elementary education is a great example. Men do face discrimination if they want to go into L-Ed, other than being a principal. I think it's gotten better. It actually had started getting better when I was working on my doctorate. One of the things I thought was great about MSU was they had a large number of women on the faculty. I don't see it at Bellevue now. It was a little bit back when I first started here. But right now we have a woman president. You met Dr. Hawkins when you came out to visit that one time. And my college is in the process of looking for a new dean. But the other 3 deans are all women. And so we have a lot of women faculty and women faculty who are in positions where they have some power. So I don't feel it here like it did. I don't see it as much. It may be a little bit different, but what I do see is people more willing to call it out when they see it. And that's a good thing. I don't like just calling it out to be calling it out without, context and things, because I've seen that happen too. But one of the things that I've been really pleased with, particularly with my students, is not just a lack of gender discrimination, but a pretty good lack of other types of discrimination and accepting people for who they are. That's probably another reason why I've stayed. I'm not saying that's my whole university. I'm just saying that's our psych majors, who I'm so extremely proud of. But I think it has gotten better. I did think it was going to happen to me when I was in grad school. And the reason why I say this is, you know me, I am not this svelte person. I'm a woman of substance. That's my new way of describing myself. A short woman of substance. And I figured, okay, nobody's going to find me sexually attractive in terms of professors. Okay. And the first time I'm walking out of my advisor's office and I feel his hand on the back of my neck, and I just tensed, and he knew not to screw around with me after that, really surprised me, frankly. And that soured that whole relationship. But he was the only cognitive kind of person within that department at the time. And I was not going to go over to the psych department at Purdue because they did have a very, at the time, bad reputation. A lot of people in developmental actually came over to my department because of sexual harassment. But at Purdue, it was also not gender specific. The male grad students were hit upon by female faculty as well. I'll never forget going to SRCD, Society for Research and Child Development, with one of my friends, and we were in San Francisco. Boston. Yeah, San Francisco. And I can still remember my friend Beth saying, "Don't go by him, don't go by him, don't go by him." And these were all faculty at Purdue. And I thought, but, no, don't go by him, don't go. And it was kind of like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So it has gotten better. There's more work. I'm serious when I say I see things happening in the opposite direction at times. You can just look at the field of psychology and the number of men who are not entering into psychology. It's become much more of a woman's discipline. And which is kind of scary because we need everybody. One of the things I'm impressed with APA is their acceptance in how the past, we have a diversity of people in charge of APA and LGBTQ plus and those kinds of things. So being a woman of substance, I also was discriminated because of that. One of my job interviews, I no sooner got off the plane and the person who came to pick me up, who was the department chair, went right to the ticket counter and changed my ticket to leave earlier than was expected. And it's like, there's one reason you've done that. It's because of my size. So that actually is where I've had more discrimination.
Really?
Yeah. Than necessarily gender discrimination. So yeah, it's better. There's things we can work on. I'm actually working on building with my students even more appreciation. I don't like the word tolerance. Tolerance to me is negative. It's like you don't like it, but you still have to do it. But an appreciation for the diversity of people's experiences, especially with this COVID pandemic. And I'm invoking like APA ethical guidelines in my courses saying you're wearing a mask because beneficence and being respectful for others is part of the guidelines you're supposed to be following. So it's been an interesting ride, so to speak.
So Roxanne,
go ahead.
I want to circle back to something that you mentioned and kind of wind down.
Okay.
You mentioned along the way in our discussion the leadership at your college, your president, and the 3 other deans. So when are you going to apply for the dean's position?
No way. A long, long time ago, I had thought that what I really wanted to be, and this is going to show how old I am, was to be a dean of women at a college. Okay. And then I thought I could do dean of students. I had actually applied to be an assistant in the ombudsman department at Michigan State, and I didn't get it. But I feel advocating for students is one of my strengths. And I actually was the developer and the program director for our human services master's degree when it first started. And I had to make decisions because Bellevue is very corporate, very business model, between what was good for students and what was good for the stakeholders. And I would always go towards what was good for the students. And whoops, are you there? Oops.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I know what happened. My computer just went to sleep. And so I mean, I'll be program director of psychology. I love doing that, but I don't think I want to go beyond that. I got that experience, being president of RMPA, which you're to blame for, but that's okay. And I got,
I only cast one vote. I can't take credit for all the other votes.
no, but you were the one pushing me along the way.
Very gently.
Very gently. I'm glad that I did it. But I think I am better one-on-one or small groups and doing those kinds of things, rather than like being a dean. A dean at a school in this day and age isn't what a dean was, let's say, 40 years ago. They're often not a faculty advocate. And I don't like making that decision. I don't play well with the public. I can interact with the public really well, but I would rather, if I'm going to make a decision, it's going to be for my students or for my colleagues, rather than necessary for the almighty dollar. And the dollar is important. Again, I mean, I'm at an institution that's not in trouble, unlike many institutions in this country. But there's too much pressure on doing some things that I don't necessarily feel comfortable doing. So in my old age, or older age, in my maturity, let's put it that way, what I'd really like to see doing in the future, because even when I retire, I can't see myself not teaching, is to work with some kind of a nonprofit, promoting educational programs across the board to help people out, to help them to understand, not necessarily getting a degree or something, but to do more public service kind of education, is what I really like to do, unless Disney hires me. Okay.
Does Bellevue have a forced retirement age?
No, we don't. I'm planning on 70. It all depends on a whole bunch of things. But we do have a corporate relationship with Disney. And they have a lot of educational programs that a lot of people don't know about. And that was always my dream, is to go work for the mouse and help them. I have lots of Disney students, and they're a joy. Along the way. And so it'd be something like that. I wish COVID would go away so I could travel, because I still haven't gotten to Ireland. But yeah, I've seen too many faculty members become administrators, and they've lost their souls, in some ways, not all of them. One of the people, who I respect very highly here at Bellevue, used to be my boss. He was the VPAA. And he was miserable, and he'd put these mandates down. And, as a person, he was a wonderful person. And finally, he gave that up because he couldn't handle it anymore. It caused all sorts of physical problems for him. Now he teaches, and he is happy, and he is just the most he's interesting because he's ethnic Jew, he's a Buddhist priest, he's a Harley rider, and he's just got some of the most beautiful tattoos you'd ever want to see, and works with trauma teams here in the state of Nebraska. And he's so much happier now not being an administrator.
I think the best administrators, I'm going to go above department chair, they cannot be conflict avoidant.
No.
And it sounds to me, as you've described, and you can disagree with me, that you tend to be conflict avoidant. And I will say to you right now, I tend to be conflict avoidant, which is why I will never go above the department chair category. I'll never be a dean. I don't see myself applying for a dean job. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
I don't enjoy conflict.
I don't enjoy conflict either. And when I do end up in a conflict, I get mad at myself for losing. I lost it actually on Tuesday when I had my review of our program assessment report. And it's like, okay, you got too many verbs in here, Roxanne. And I said, that's copied exactly from APA's recommendations for the undergraduate major. And I thought, it ruined the rest of my day. So I try to avoid conflict if at all possible. And the way I administrate as a program director, which is like a department chair, my faculty, I don't care if they're part-timers or full-timers, we're a team. We work as a team. I'm not their supervisor. And that becomes very important because we get things done that other programs don't get done, who have more of a, I am the boss, you are my underlings kind of thing. And that's not good for higher order administration. So, yep, you're right. I'm conflict resistant.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so funny. I'm smiling because in higher ed, at least amongst faculty members, it's funny to think about somebody as a boss.
I know.
Because, I mean, I think the best analogy ever is cat herding. You know, I mean, nobody's a boss amongst faculty members. We're so independent.
Yeah, it's one of those things where even with my students, I go by my first name in class. Okay. If you can't call me Roxanne, that's fine. Just don't call me Mrs. Sullivan because that's my mom. But I still have respect for my students. And I try to make them part of a team. And they don't like when Dr. Sullivan shows up. But that's when the difference, by the way. Oh, they don't. No, there's Roxanne and there's Dr. Sullivan, and you don't screw up Dr. Oh, no.
Yeah.
They'll look at me and go, oh, my God, are you Dr. Sullivan? I said, yep. What did we do? Well, where would you like me to start? They'll do avoidance to do that. That's the one big difference between online and face-to-face is my students residentially, it's Roxanne. And there's some who, because of how they were raised, can't call me by my first name, and that's fine.
That's right.
Very few people online will call me by my first name. The ones who've had me for 2 or 3 courses will. But I've got some who'll go, Instructor Sullivan. And I thought, who are you talking about? At least if you're going to use a title, use doctor. And I think I'm not as close as I am with my residential students. And you had a unique experience with me this summer, talking with my course, my group.
I had a lovely time.
That was the first time they'd ever seen each other. That's the first time I'd seen them. So it was kind of this unique experience that after that meeting, then they loosened up with me a lot. And they actually turned out to be a great class. This was one of the better summers I've had in a long time with the students because you had an impact, your book had an impact. But now that they could see who I was as a person, that made a big difference. And I'm going to incorporate some of that into my online classes this coming fall, having kind of a meet and greet Zoom session if people want to come.
Yep. Absolutely. Roxanne, I know I've kept you over an hour, but I want to give you this offer. Was there anything that you were hoping to talk about or hoping to mention in our time together? I want to make sure that you have a chance.
I think I've hit everything. Other than, I mean, you sort of know me, you've sort of seen me teach in the past, that the one thing about Bellevue is that it has made me appreciate and not be afraid of change. And learning how to adapt quickly, yet still maintaining integrity. I think if there's anything I'm proud of what I've done at Bellevue, was to know where to pick my fights and to still have a program, regardless if you're all online, all in the classroom, or a mix, that we have a psychology program where students are being trained as psychological scientists or any other kind of career. And it's because I can pick and choose good things and maintain integrity and still play whatever game I need to play to be able to ensure that I can continue what I'm doing. And
Well,
that's probably it.
absolutely. I mean, I've known you for quite some time, and you've had to pivot in a number of different, let's call them educational models,
Mm-hmm.
or different ways that Bellevue was thinking about going into the marketplace, and whether to, when the psychology major was first thinking about tinkering about going online, and different ways to do that with different faculty members. And the other thing I want to mention just briefly is that you've really been enmeshed and a part of that Bellevue student community for quite some time. I know that you, and when your mom was alive, you and your mom were both just
Mm-hmm.
loyal volleyball enthusiasts, and very loyal to students there at Bellevue.
Yeah, it's because I enjoy it. It keeps me young. Um, Nobody believes how old I am when I tell them how old I am. And it's like, you can't beat 64. And I said, yeah, I am. But, teaching keeps me young. And I think that's part of it, is being enmeshed with students, regardless of their age, but always remembering I'm learning as well as you're learning. I don't think they realize faculty learn a lot when we teach. It really should be a two-way street. And that's what I've appreciated about Bellevue, is I don't feel like I have this sea of faces where no one's paying attention to me. Not saying there aren't people who don't pay attention, but in general, I do make it a part of a conversation, and it's that two-way street, that give and take, that becomes so important, because I learn so much every single time I teach.
Well, but Roxanne, and maybe we're getting close to the end here. I know that's what you appreciate about Bellevue, but that's what you would have appreciated at any institution that you would have taught at in the United States. That I know you think that's unique to Bellevue, but if you would have taught at UNL, or if you would have taught at the University of Oklahoma, you would have found the strength and the beauty of that institution and their students. It's not the institution, Roxanne. It's
Yeah.
you.
And you put UNL and Oklahoma in the same breath. Good thing you're
I'm
not in
sorry.
Nebraska.
Did I was just looking for institutions in
No,
the
it's
Midwest.
because Nebraska and Oklahoma have been long, long rivals
I,
um, with
I'm
football.
sorry.
No,
I
that's
we
okay,
well
because
we
I'm
could
not.
edit that out. It was meant to be a compliment to you.
Oh,
It
no,
really
no,
was.
no. It was a compliment to me, because I'm not a big UNL fan anyway, um, in terms of sports. Um, but it's just so funny, because the state used to shut down on the Oklahoma Nebraska game,
Sure.
and the suicide rates went up too, which is scary. But yeah, no, yeah, I probably would have. It's this, I think what Bellevue did was give me that opportunity because I wasn't under that publish or perish kind of pressure that I might have been in.
Yeah.
See,
But there are thousands of small liberal
oh
arts
yeah,
colleges around the country that might have also, and this special place that you cherish oh so much. I hope that you will also realize after 38 years, maybe it's so special in part because you are there.
it would be nice to think that way. So, yeah. By the way, did I ever tell you I interviewed at Williams College?
No, I don't think you have.
And do you know who interviewed me at Williams College?
I have no idea.
A first or second year faculty member by the name of Saul Casson.
Saul Casson.
Yeah.
I think he grew up to be somebody.
He did grow up to be somebody. Yeah. And yeah, he was one of the people who interviewed me. He was like, I think the second year he was at Williams. And so, and that would have been it would have been a different experience, but
Yeah.
yeah, small liberal arts schools. Small
I just hope
schools.
that you will realize that you grew up to be somebody too. And
Oh, yeah.
just realize the students' lives that you've impacted. And Roxanne, I want to thank you for your time today. And it's been awesome. Thank you.
It's been fun. I enjoyed it.